Currently, right now, the NBA Finals consist of Golden State Warriors playing against Cleveland Cavaliers. And people are questioning the NBA being watered down as if it's not on a certain level of appeal or entertainment level that it used to be. Um, and I'm going to explain how this is false. First of all, the idea of the super team, which is what people are criticizing the league for right now. It is not a new thing in the NBA. It has existed for years, going back to the Bill Russell age when there was only 9 teams in the league, and certain teams were great while certain teams were terrible. Up through all the way through the day, even your great '80s teams were super teams, especially the '80s. The '80s was the benchmark era for super teams. The Lakers, the the Lakers, the 76ers, the the Boston Celtics, and at the end of the '80s, the Detroit Pistons. Now, the concept of how super teams were built are different now than what they used to be. But all in all, there were super teams then. Now, at a time, super teams were built basically general managers, ownership, coaches. They would design trades in higher market cities to create a super team. It was not the players who created the super team. It was franchises. But in essence, we can also blame the league because at that time, if you really notice, the super teams were usually the Lakers, Boston Celtics. They tried. There were attempts to get them in New York. You tend to notice that super teams were usually formed in cities. Mostly Boston and Los Angeles are traditionally super team cities, and you tend to realize that how these super teams were built back then is it's worse than what people think of it now. Now it's players who decide to go to a team who has cap room, who've honestly done the work. The fans supported the team, or it's just a great place to live, like Miami, for instance. Young 25-year-old guys want to live in Miami. That makes sense. New York would be a place that is a destination to create a super team if they had management that players were satisfied with. But here's the deal. Right now, people are upset that Kevin Durant joined a super team that was already a super team before he got there. But they were smart enough to create the cap room, and somewhat fortunate because they got all their players signed before the collective bargaining agreement kicked in the big money contracts, which means when their players' contracts are starting to end, it will be after they can fill in their rosters with even bigger contracts because, for instance, Kevin Durant was only able to sign with Golden State because the salary cap went up massively. Therefore, they had the money when they already had Klay Thompson, they already had Draymond Green, and they already had Steph Curry signed the long-term deals. Now, coming this year, I want to say Steph Curry contract comes to an end, and he's going to sign a big money deal. Kevin Durant, who signed a 2-year deal with an option after one season, he's going to opt out of that contract, and he's going to sign a long-term deal. And that is pretty much, if you really pay attention late, you tend to realize when superstars sign, they tend to sign short-term contracts because they can wait until that real money comes in. And I want to say next year, I think it's this off season, the money kicks in when it gets to the 5-year, $200 million contracts. Now, there's another controversy when it comes to super teams, and that is the top. Well, like I said earlier, is to talk about how they're designed. Now, people get upset at LeBron for and Wade and Bosh for joining together to go to Miami, but people forget what was happening at that time. You had a Boston Celtics team who was built basically off of a former Boston Celtic player trading his best player to the Boston Celtics for. Do anybody know who Garnett was traded for? Only guy I can remember is Al Jefferson, and is he even in the league anymore? Now, at the same time, the Lakers, which actually was funny about it, that trade happened after a former Los Angeles Laker player traded his best player to the Los Angeles Lakers to form that super team. So that was already two super teams in the league. Yeah, Paul Gasol getting traded to the Lakers form the super team. Now, then again, we need to define the term super team. Here's a smart definition on my hand. A super team is a team that is formed that, well, it's not even formed. You can create a super team through drafts and just being a smart collective general manager signing guys who are going to be good. You just have to have the eye to see it. But super teams are basically two prime Hall of Fame talented players plus an all-star, a current all-star. That is one way. The other way is at minimal 4 all-stars on the team at the same time. So if you go by that, Boston was a super team. Lakers were a super team. And you can even go back to before that, the Detroit Pistons were a super team. Now, people bring up the conversation of Michael Jordan winning it, and he didn't need a super team. He had a super team, but Jerry Krause did the work to create that super team, making a draft day trade to get Scottie Pippen, having the Jordan on the team. And I always say the first three-peat Jordan had, that was not a super team, but the second three-peat was a super team. Soon as they traded Will Perdue for Dennis Rodman, that made that team a super team. By my definition, 2 all-stars. I mean, 2 Hall of Fame players, but actually that was 3 Hall of Fame players. Jordan, Pippen, and Rodman, all Hall of Fame players in their prime. Therefore, they're a super team. What people also fail to realize is during that era, there was no other super team. The Rockets tried to create one, but that super team, those players were on the back end of their Hall of Fame careers. And maybe you can say Utah, but I don't know. I don't recall if Hornacek was an all-star at the time, but I know, Hall of Fame players, Karl Malone, John Stockton, were still in the back end of their prime. They were still in their prime. So you can go back and check. I want to say Hornacek was all-star. So I'm going to give them credit for being a super team. But if you go back to when Jordan started winning championships, there were no super teams in the league. So there was no need to ask franchise general managers to form a super team. There was no need to create those trades, because what happened was the Detroit Pistons' legacy started to die out. They were at the end. Their super team was going downhill. Boston Celtics super team started having health problems as soon as they got to the playoffs. They were still winning regular season games, but as soon as they got to the playoffs, they were not performing at the same level because injuries, or they just ran into younger teams who just ran them out the gym. The Los Angeles Lakers super team ended because Kareem retired, Magic retired, Worthy was at the end of his career. Therefore, the Lakers super team had died off. So that was no more super teams for about a good 4 years, maybe. about 4 years. I would say the first year Jordan got to the finals, that was still super teams who were still in the prime of the at the back end prime of their careers. But you had a long run with no super teams. Now, I would say the Lakers created a super team. Was the next super team to get created after the Bulls when when they signed when they made the trade for Glenn Rice, and it was Shaq, Kobe, and Glenn Rice, and then, but after that, I don't know if you really call the Shaq and Kobe combination a super team after Glenn Rice retired, but they were the best of the best. Now, there were teams that were close. The Dallas Mavericks, Sacramento Kings, Phoenix Suns. But I can't call them super teams. Now, there's also this thing going on in which people says the East has been weak, but people don't realize the East has been the weaker conference way longer than they thought. It all started when, like I say, when the Detroit Pistons and Boston Celtics were dying off. When those two super teams started to die off, Michael Jordan had no challenges in the East. People would look at, they had maybe every year there was one team to step up. You had people point at the Knicks. The Knicks were a one-team guy with a bunch of guys who just played tough defense, who basically, they play tough defense, guys who basically hit people hard. That's what they did. But they had one shooter around. And I think honestly, I think they were a team that was constricted. I mean, yeah, they weren't. How am I gonna say this? They weren't built to last. They weren't built to win. They built a team around a post guy, but they put no shooters around a post guy. They had Starks. That's about it. Who was streaky at best. He was not a pure shooter. Derek Harper was a good creator at the time, but not a high percentage shooter. But they were all defensive guys, so they helped teams down, kept the games up in the low to middle 90s, and slowed the pace down. Now, there's also the romanticizing of the 90s era, in which, if you want to start paying attention, it was the beginning of bad basketball. You started seeing Mike Fratello come to the league, and I can't think of the other coach for Detroit at the time, but they basically set up systems to slow down games, slow down pace of games, and it was basically 5 seconds on the shot clock, create, and to stay close in games, which the whole league started emulating, and that's where the term hero ball, I ain't gonna say the term, but that's what created the ideal of hero ball being a system of offense in a league, which actually created some bad basketball all the way through mid 2005. Around 2005, it was bad basketball. You started seeing games called offensive juggernauts that was like 95 to 90. It was bad basketball, no passing. People claim it was just great defense, but it was really just isolate at the top of the key, run the clock down to 5, create, and don't mess up. It was not good basketball. There was not a lot of passing. There was not a lot of running. There was not a lot of shooting. Honestly, to be honest, my favorite era of basketball, if you go watch the 80s era, it was high intensity, run the ball down the floor, quick scores, try to get the baskets as quick as possible, run your opponent out the gym. And people are upset at current basketball. They call it soft because they actually do the same thing. They just try to run you out the floor. Now there's the ideal of you're not allowed to hit anybody now, but that was started in the mid '90s when the league started having players have full brawls. Remember mid '90s? I want to say it was the New York Knicks got into a brawl with a team, and they basically either it was the Knicks or it was the Atlanta Hawks. I can't remember, but they got into a brawl and players started getting coming off the bench fighting. So they started created the rule you can't come off the bench during the incident, and still fights were still happening in the league, and you can also go back to the late '80s, the '80s when they created the flagrant foul rule, which meant basically you couldn't hit anybody hard. So all this talk about the Michael Jordan era, you were able to hit people. That wasn't happening. It wasn't allowed in the league that during the Michael Jordan run. You weren't allowed to hit people. The first championship run, you was allowed to extend your arms. You were allowed to hand check, but that was eliminated before Jordan's second run. So when I hear people say, "Oh, you was allowed to hand check then when Jordan was winning championships," that was only half the championships. The last three, you were not allowed to hand check. Hand checking was eliminated in '94. Other things. Now, I think the ideal of winning alone. Jordan never won alone. Magic never won alone. Bird never won alone. Kobe, Shaq were together. You go back to the Detroit Pistons, a full unit. The San Antonio Spurs, full unit. Duncan didn't win alone. There was always guys with talent around them. So this ideal of people should win it alone, you're creating a false ideal, a false possibility. The only player to win a NBA championship within the last 20 years without having that Hall of Fame talent on that team was the Houston Rockets in '94, the first championship. It was Elijah won and a bunch of guys, Robert Ory, Sam Cassell, Kenny Smith, Otis Thorpe. They were talented guys. They were a team built around Elijah One, but that was no second All-Star. It was only Elijah One, a Hall of Fame talent with some good players around him that worked with him. Now they brought in Clyde Drexler, for the second championship. So he had help that year, but before that first championship, there was no array of talent to say that he wanted with someone. Now a lot of Mavericks fans try to point out that Dirk Nowitzki won alone, but let's not forget that he still had some talent with him. He still had Jason Kidd with him, even though Jason Kidd, I would say, not in his prime anymore. But still, you have a guy who has the ability to see the floor, make good passes, make smart decisions. You had a good formidable defensive center like Tyson Chandler, but I wouldn't compare him to Hall of Fame talent. So but I still can't say Dirk Nowitzki won it alone. Nah. But, I was just trying to get my thoughts on this ideal of a super team. Now, people are wondering what can be done about these super teams, and the league did exactly the wrong thing. If they actually cared about getting rid of super teams, it's a simple fix. Get rid of max contracts, but owners are not going to get rid of that. The fact that you have a max amount of money that you can give your best player, why would a player stay with a team if the ideal is to win championships and there's no incentive to staying in a city? Oh yeah, people point out that you can sign a 5-year deal instead of a 4-year deal. So you know what they do? Kevin Durant, LeBron James, I'm gonna sign short-term deals with options, and I can just opt out and then sign that 5-year deal. So guess what? Yeah. That doesn't happen. You don't have that option of that doesn't stop a super team. That doesn't stop a player from leaving because he still can get paid elsewhere. So the only way you can eliminate super teams or limit super teams is get rid of max contracts. Because if you get rid of max contracts, that means Durant would have been able to make whatever he earned brought to the team in Oklahoma City, and any other player can make what they can negotiate. It's not what you deserve. I mean, it's not what you deserve. It's what you negotiate. That's a smart term I've heard from someone smart say. But I just want to give my opinion on the ideal of super team and this ideal that it's this new thing in the league. This is kind of a fresh, unedited video, so you know what? I was just giving my opinion. All right, later.